This week on the Notorious Scoundrels podcast.
Wedge is still super unplayable.
He's better than he was. He's worth 5 points at least. Yeah. Yeah.
Welcome to the Notorious Scoundrels, a podcast focused on tactics and competitive play for Star Wars Legion. Hosted by Kyle Dornbos, Michael Barry, and David Zelenka, with Jay Shalansky, the man behind the glass.
Hello and welcome back to the Notorious Scoundrels podcast. My name is Kyle. I'm here with Mike and David. How you guys doing?
Pretty good.
You're doing pretty good, yeah. Getting some Worlds prep done. Thinking hard about Rebels versus CIS. Thinking hard about lots of other potential lists one might face. Thinking about Euro camps.
How much do you hate Count Dooku?
A lot. He's very good.
Okay.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for kicking my ass repeatedly with that guy. Learning to respect him day by day.
Yeah, you don't want to mess with the Count. He's very good at dealing with aggressive units like Tauntauns and Luke. So
one dead Tauntaun. We'll just keep piling on the body count as the game goes on.
Yep.
That lightning saber throw combo is nuts, man. It's really good.
It's good. I'm not
It's
sure.
Real good.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'd take saber throw just for that, but it's good.
It's pretty dang nice.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I prefer having the exhaustible force powers on him.
Yeah,
choke push reflexes is pretty good when you have Master of the Force 2.
Yeah, you get a ton of mileage from Master of the Force 2.
All right, so we have a lot of things on the agenda today. We are going to talk about our RRG takeaways last week, and by last week I mean yesterday. 'Cause when the episode aired, we talked to Luke about Luke Eddy about the RRG, and of course he basically wrote the thing along with Alex. So that was something falling off my desk. Not a copy of the RRG.
Nice.
No, it needs to be at least twice as loud, Crash, because
Yeah, it's very thick. So yeah, we'll talk about our takeaways from that relatedly, because it was the first major event to use the new RRG, including the Tauntaun and Shore changes. We're going to talk about the Eurochamp results. That would be the European Championship results. They do, in fact, play Legion over there. And we're also going to talk a little Legion 101, how to play a gunline versus an aggressive list, and vice versa. And then in our exploratory section, because we promised we would do this 2 weeks ago and then we didn't, we're going to talk a little bit about Chewie. So, Fifth Trooper, our brother podcast, sister podcast, related podcast, other network podcast, is going to have a super awesome interview this week with somebody that I'm sure most of our listeners have heard of outside the context of Legion. So this individual also apparently plays Legion. But check that out. I've listened to some of it already. It's awesome. So check out the Fifth Trooper this week. Also, as we approach Adepticon, just another plug for our YouTube, the Fifth Trooper YouTube. So go subscribe to that, which I just learned how to do recently. There's a little button that says subscribe, and you just click on it. All right, that's housekeeping. Somebody else can do that segment next week. Now it's at the news.
Welcome to In the News.
All right, so we did get a new RRG last week. It was officially legal on the 28th, which was Friday. So there's a lot of stuff in there. Let's set aside the Tauntaun and Shore changes for a minute. Besides that, do you guys have like any major takes on the rest of the stuff that is in there?
Wedge is still super unplayable.
He's better than he was. He's worth 5 points at least.
Yeah. Yeah, we actually didn't get to that with Luke, but Wedge now. I guess you still have to exhaust him, but he now gives you a free pivot.
Yeah, it's
So
like
it seems like
it's like worse reposition.
right.
Kind
It's
of.
exhaustible reposition.
Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, like, I sort of feel like if you're gonna make a change that affects the airspeeder, you might as well make one that like means something. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I don't. I mean,
It seemed like very obscure. Like it was like one of those things where you're like in Congress and fighting over a bill, and somebody like throws a bridge to nowhere in there. That's what this felt like to me.
or you
Yeah.
discover some precedent from like the 18th century.
Yeah,
Some 200-year-old law that kind of like, oh,
It's
this
illegal.
actually applies here.
Oh, it's illegal to hang your boxers from a flagpole. Oh, we better fix that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
Wedge took his boxers down from the flagpole, and he's joined the rest of the Legion crew. Also, not being the best 5-point upgrade in the game. So
yeah.
I don't know. It like really stuck out to me. I was like, why did this even happen?
It's weird to like errata a bad card to then still be bad. Like why?
I mean, okay. The one place I think is okay. Hear me out on this. All right. So they give us the jockey, which is the answer to the DLT spam problem, before the game was full of critical guns, which obsoleted that fix immediately.
Sure.
And so now the pilot slot is open season. And so you're like, okay, well, now I can take a 5-point wedge and free 5 points up for LTA when targeting array, the target thing. I could see that being a thing. That's where I see that card fitting in.
I will say that the fact that this card is bad has a lot more to do with the unit it's attached to than.
Yeah, like the ability is interesting, but ultimately it's literally exhaustible reposition. Like I think if they had just cut the exhaust off the card and then kept the pivot text the same and essentially just given it reposition, I think that would have still been fine.
Someone at my local said they could fix the airspeeder by giving it the high impact shell to make it
I can see that.
super threatening, like make it an actual tank hunter that's a glass cannon.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like the airspeeder has a compulsory move. I don't really feel like it generally has issues with getting to where it needs to be.
I agree.
Yeah, I'd rather. I mean, the problem with the airspeeder is that it has 6 dice.
Yep.
Yeah,
with no way to increase the amount of dice it has,
and not 9. Yeah.
I mean, you could have it 10 dice, man. You've got that sweet ground buffer.
Not in the same pool.
Not in the same pool.
Unless somehow you manage to get a unit in both your front and rear arcs.
Right. Well,
that's what that reposition's for, right?
Right. Yet again, like I mean, yeah, okay. I'll buy that. If you ever played, okay, I'm just gonna take a little tangent here. Sorry. If you ever played X-Wing, all right. There's a ship called the TIE Special Forces that has a front arc and a rear arc, and the dream shot was to maneuver so that you got both your ass and your front within range 1 of enemy targets. And so I guess I could see that being true for wedge, except there's no bonus to doing that. There's no actual bonus other than the opportunity to shoot. It's not like you're somehow adding dice because you put yourself in a certain part of the board. In fact, I'd almost say that aggressive positioning is worse because you are vulnerable to being shot by more things. So it's like Legion punishes this mechanic horrendously. It's not a benefit to actually flex your arsenal too.
Yeah, I'm always hesitant to get my ass in range 1 of enemy targets.
Yeah, for real. It's not never good. Never good.
Anyway,
all right.
Sorry, I'm just
moving on.
I'm spitting hot lead today. I don't know.
Let's. So the as far as takes are concerned, I think the secret mission bounty thing was great.
It's what it should have been from the start.
Right. Yeah. They just no interaction whatsoever, no touching.
Yeah, thank goodness.
it's much clearer that way. There's no possible gotcha moments. Balance wise, it creates, or rather preserves, bounty as a potential counter to R2, which I think is necessary.
Yeah, I thought it was actually the more interesting part of that change. I thought was that opposing bounties don't interact with each other anymore, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, and that's going to be like, I mean, that's a real ninja change, and I think people are probably going to play that wrong for a bit because that one was not well advertised.
I mean, I didn't know it until Luke was like, "Hey, and this thing," and I was like, "Oh, interesting."
Yeah,
I think thematically it made sense the way it worked to some degree.
Like you could steal another bounty hunter's bounty.
Oh yeah, there's like all sorts of stories in Star Wars lore about bounty hunters tracking down bounty hunters who had a bounty that they were like, that's the thing.
Yep. Yeah.
So I don't know,
but I think it's probably cleaner this way.
Yeah, I think it makes sense from a rules perspective for sure.
All right, so let's talk about the Tauntaun and shore changes real quick.
One more thing before we go on. I'm sorry, I should have leapt in earlier.
No worries.
Was the repulsor vehicle height thing? Is that new? Repulsors can move over terrain that they're taller than.
I don't know if it's new. I'm not sure if that's blue text or not. I think it just hasn't been relevant before because all repulsor vehicles have had the speed or X keyword.
Oh, okay.
Which means that they explicitly ignore terrain less than height, whatever.
Okay.
Oh, let's stop and hold up for a second. What you meant to say was all repulsor vehicles were bad.
Well, that's also accurate. But the point is,
when we talk about Euros, we should talk about this because a certain repulsor vehicle made a big splash at Euros. We should talk about that.
Yeah, we will in a second. But yeah, I think it was just whether it was there or not. It hasn't really been relevant until we got the hover tanks, which don't have the speeder keyword, but are in fact repulsor vehicles,
and they're actually good.
Right. Yes. The Saber and the AAT.
Yeah.
Oh, we should mention that, by the way. So they did send out an email. I don't know if we've had a cast since they did this. They sent out an email to the World's players, which was also posted in various places. The AAT will be out on March 20th. They are essentially waiving the 11-day legality. Yeah, gosh, I can't talk today. Legality rule for it, and they're also waiving the painting requirement. So you can buy your AAT on March 20th, which is well within 11 days of Adepticon, and you don't have to paint it, and you can use it at Adepticon. So
I've never heard of them doing this for any unit. At least
like across any game system.
Across any of their games. Yeah, I've never heard of them doing this.
Yeah. I mean, it's a little unprecedented. I think it was clear that the Saber and the AAT were supposed to be out at the same time as like a mirrored release, and for whatever reason, the AAT got delayed, and they wanted to make sure that CIS players could still use their big fun toy. I don't know. I don't really have an opinion one way or the other about this.
I mean, I think it's unprecedented, but I think the delays they're having are also kind of unprecedented.
Yeah.
To some degree. I don't know.
I mean, if they didn't have the delay, it would have been legal, right? Like,
the intended release date was, like a few days ago, the 28th. So, whatever's causing the delay, obviously we don't have any insight into that, but it was not planned, and they're still going to let CIS players use it at Adepticon. They were also careful to say that anything else released on that same date would not be legal. So we'll have to see what that is. But obviously, this tells me, I think this kind of codifies or solidifies what is in fact going to be legal for Worlds, which is essentially what we now have plus the AAT, and that's it.
Yeah, they definitely, the implication of that article was the AAT is the last thing that will be legal for Worlds, for sure.
Yep, that's how I read it as well. So, for those that were worried that like vital assets or something like that might drop at the last minute and everyone has to scramble to deal with 9 new battle cards, it sounds like that's not going to be the case. So
Embrace the chaos.
I think that would have been hilarious, but as actually Luke talked about it. I mean, I think he explicitly said, that this would be like the sort of the end of this year of Legion. So dropping vital assets right before that and making it legal would be kind of weird. So with that in mind, let's talk about those Tauntaun and short changes. Short has essentially lost the ability to do the comms relay chain. I need to rewrite half of my short troop article. But yeah, the emplacements cannot take comms relay anymore. I think this affects certain types of Empire lists, but generally speaking, it doesn't really touch the inherent efficiency of the short trooper unit, to include the T-21B. My 2 favorite lists from LVO were Luke Cook's and our colleague Mike Cirillo's, neither of which had comms relays in them, and both of which included at least 2 short troopers. So, I don't know. I think it's still very possible to get orders to your shores most of the time, and they're still a great unit. Regardless.
Yeah, I mean, I think this brings the power level of. I mean, first of all, I don't think this does anything to the power level of short troopers generally. I think it brings the power level of certain lists down. Lists that were running like Bosk and also getting a bunch of aim tokens through like Krennic DT comms relay shenanigans aren't going to get to do that anymore on certain turns.
Right. Or like the ATST list that like Luke Cook was running in Invader, where you're basically running an ATST, making sure it gets an order with like targeting array every turn, and then also, like all your short troopers get orders too.
Well, I actually think that those lists are probably less affected. Like, clearly it hurts that one specifically, but like you still have a bunch of command cards that give orders to multiple things. Sure, on your assault turn, like you only have 1 order on the ST, but like on your ambush turn, not assault. But on your assault turn, you're still handing out a bunch of aim tokens, and on your coordinated fire turn, you're still handing out a bunch of aim tokens. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, if you're running a list with the generics in there, plus some commander that's hands out orders himself, then you're probably still mostly getting orders to most of your shores anyway.
I mean, it kind of solidifies Krennic as the best short trooper commander because Krennic DT relay works around it. And I think just about every shore list that was going to take relays now drops all the relays and buys scopes instead. So,
yeah,
nice. That's like, thanks FFG for helping me build a better list.
Or like a
because now my scope shores are just going to wreck your face.
I mean, I think that there is a reasonable argument that scope shores are just better than having mortars with comms relays. Like the mortar comms relay is like more efficient, but like if you weren't going to do anything with all those extra orders anyways, like I don't know, having scopes is way better. I think the problem with the short trooper is not fundamentally the mortar relay problem.
Yeah.
You're just kind of closing a loophole, so to speak.
Yeah.
It takes the bleeding edge off, but there's still plenty of edge left. Imagine rerolling 3 dice on a T21, and getting more crits, even more crits.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to make any change to the short trooper unit, I think I'd just remove critical 1.
Yeah, actually. Yeah.
I think they're fine if you do that.
Still have the rerolls.
Yeah, but I think that's okay. I think an 84 point unit,
totally.
Having a strong dice pool is okay.
Yeah.
I think the primary issue is like they have a strong dice pool at range 4 because of critical 1, and it's a problem.
Yeah,
I agree.
Like it's not remotely weird to get two, if not like 3 crits at range 4 with that. Yeah.
Yeah, you're like, okay, I've got 2 or 3 aim tokens. Like, I'm just gonna reroll into 2 to 3 hits through heavy cover, and we're at range 4, so good luck.
Yep. I mean, I think it was actually Larry the Lobster on the Discord that said this. I think he put it well with these changes where, uh, you know, both Tauntauns and Shore Troopers now sort of have to play the game instead of breaking the rules, but they're still way more efficient than other choices.
Yeah.
I think
Larry
that's a good
gets
summary.
it.
Yeah.
Larry gets it.
Well, and essentially, like, we should sort of reiterate what Luke Eddy himself said, which is basically that, like, they wanted to address some of the bigger negative play experiences associated with the units and some of the things that felt like abusive loopholes, but that they have not, foregone potential future balance changes for those units after Worlds. So, yeah, and then the Tauntaun quote unquote nerf is just that they essentially, and it's worth explaining a little bit specifically how this works because it's a little bit confusing if you just read the text. They can no longer just freely move out of melee. They have to withdraw with a speed 1 move, but unlike other units, when withdrawing, they can also take whatever free actions are available to them. So that means relentless and agile specifically, and reposition. So it's essentially identical now to how emplacement troopers work with respect to withdrawing.
Except you don't have a 7 die melee pool attached to it.
Right, and you don't have things like relentless that give you those free actions. But like as far as the raw rules are concerned, it's functionally the same. You have to withdraw, but when you do so, you can take whatever free actions you would normally get. So the implications are, of course, they're slower when they withdraw. They can't, what is it? Roughly 5 inches is much shorter than 17 and a half as far as their threat range is concerned.
17 and a half plus ramming.
Well, right. They can no longer ram because you need a full speed move, and it doesn't change their max speed. It just mandates that you make a speed 1 move.
Yeah, so it shuts off their ability to ram when they withdraw.
They get 1 agile proc instead of 2. So, like, it's definitely worse when they're coming out of combat, but I also think by the time that they've already rammed something the first time, you're kind of screwed anyway.
Well, so I think that this. So yes, first of all, I think this kind of takes away the move, shoot, move into melee strategy that Tauns employ, because you really can't afford to be tied up with a full unit anymore.
Right. Yep.
Because they'll beat you up because white saves are not great when you don't have those dodge tokens, and B, just because you need to be able to ram stuff once you're in melee. It's important.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I've played a few games with the changes. They don't feel that different, frankly. So.
Yeah, I feel like this is one of those things that will quote unquote come up, but by the time it comes up, it's not going to change the game outcome.
It came up in one game that I remember that it changed the outcome, and that's when a Taun unit went into melee to get safe and then couldn't full speed away to break through later on because they were still tied up.
Are you talking about that game with me?
Yeah.
Yeah,
because if they had their ability to go full speed out of melee, they would have definitely broken through and added their point.
Maybe, Mr. There's a Dark Lord of the Sith over there, but
yeah, I mean Vader was over there anyway. but that's the situation where it comes up is like if they need to get to a certain part of the board, you have to choose mobility or tar pit. You can't do both anymore.
Yeah,
right. And tar pitting now is a commitment as opposed to just kind of casually doing it. It's not incidental. To the point where it's sort of like, okay, well, now I need to make a choice. Do I withdraw or do I stay in, roll 7 dice at you and aim and then just do a bunch of damage to you and then force you to make the withdrawal, which is probably better because that way you've done damage and stolen tempo simultaneously rather than sacrificing your own tempo to withdraw. There's a lot more it's a lot more intricate. It's no longer very simple, which is like I win no matter what happens here.
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing in that regard is that you can't continue to melee things while getting 2 free dodge tokens every turn, right?
Yeah,
You got to be like,
gross.
okay, I'm gonna have to take the dodge action or whatever.
Right.
You know, I do think that if you resist the initial taunt charge, this makes it a lot easier to get back in the game.
Yep,
Definitely.
that's the trick, though.
Yeah, the charge has to bounce, meaning you have to roll a bunch of saves.
It's also worth noting that the changes have made it so that Luke can no longer serve a taunt unit out of melee and into another melee combat.
Yes, that's big. I love that strategy. The idea that like you can sort of pinball with serve your master well, that's gone now.
Yeah, like you can't move out of combat and then shoot. Like it's a move action or an attack action, and a withdrawal is neither of those things. So,
Right. You get to attack without the additional positional benefit, right?
right,
Of moving
yeah.
again.
Yep.
Takes that away from you.
Yeah. It definitely takes.
Which you shouldn't have.
But
You shouldn't be able to do that. That's ridiculous. Like tawns were already ridiculous. They don't need more free stuff. Like, come on.
Yeah, it's a sensible change.
Yeah.
I think it doesn't really affect their overall power level that much, but they still throw 4 reds with their shooting pistols.
I mean, max firepower pistols are still pretty good, I hear.
Playing a game over the weekend, and I had a full Rebel Trooper squad. Just lose 4 dudes. Like Tauntaun just rolls up, like John Wayne.
I'm surprised.
I'm
surprised it took you this long for that to happen to you.
Well,
like,
usually
the worst is when you think you're in cover, and then it's like, oh, guess what? There's nowhere to go because sharpshooter won. Yeah. You're open no matter what you do. In some scenarios,
and it's generally pretty easy to set up. I mean, I think the fact of the matter is that on a last first Tauntaun charge with 3 units, you have to make 33 saves. Like 33 saves are forced, essentially.
Yeah, roughly.
Between the pistols and the charge.
Yeah. Like, and just like,
it's a pretty big attack.
You got a 3-up save. Like, that's not great.
Yeah, I mean, it's still and like what 10 wounds on average.
Yeah,
that's a lot.
So like, I don't know. That's only 300 points worth of dudes, and there's generally not much you can do about it. So.
Right, there's still 500 points of list, but in back of it.
Yeah, to be fair, a lot of the Taun lists are not packing a whole lot of oomph behind that 500 points. I mean, the ones that are running Luke are, right?
Right, or the Chewie fleets, which is kind of niche, but still really good. It lets you get to 12, plus you have a second threat standing behind your Tauns, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, the way I feel about it is just like 3 units of Tauns doing that, and then like, either Luke coming up behind him and just being like, hey dudes, I'm just going to clean up the pieces, have fun. Like Luke is hard enough to deal with without the Tauns breathing down your back.
Oh, for real. Yeah.
Yep. So that was, if we want to like sort of segue into the European Championships, that was one of the most successful archetypes there was Luke plus Tauntauns.
Yeah.
Of the top 4 finishers, so this would be, I think, the 4 undefeated players after day 1. 3 of them were triple Tauntauns. And I think of those, 2 of them were Luke trips, and 1 was Leia triple Tauntauns. And then there was one Empire list actually, which was speeder bikes plus shore troopers.
What?
Which is super interesting to me. I mean, they're cheaper now. They're only 75 points. I've always kind of liked speeder bikes, but they also get shredded by sharpshooter. So I'd be very curious to see what happened there with that list and how it was played. If you were the speeder bike player and you're listening to this, let me know, because I'd be very curious to hear how your days went and how you use those speeder bikes.
I sort of feel like that list is probably pretty good against everything that isn't Tauntauns.
Yeah.
Well, from what I understand, and this is just my cursory. I mean, Ellis, who ran the thing, talked to me at least a while ago about it, and basically the notion here is you have shores with a bunch of aims from Veers, and you have 18 speeder bike dice as well. And so you're just like rolling up there with your recons and your fast speeder bikes and just pounding them to death on turn one, trying to get a lead immediately. It's very much an alpha strike style of list.
Straight up run and gun.
Yeah, exactly. You run up, you just roll up there with your aims and your speeder bikes, and you just smash into something exposed and try to kill it quickly before it can do any damage to you.
That feels like it could work pretty well, actually.
Yeah, you seize control of the board. You've got a lot of mobility in the bikes. You've got a lot of range in the shores. You got a lot of aims from veers. So it's you have all the ingredients you need to muster a good offense. And hopefully you don't lose your bikes in the process.
I mean, I guess my fundamental question here is, does that list still work if shores aren't great anymore? I don't know. He
also lost to blue on Vaps because he was red on Vaps with bikes.
Which, that doesn't seem great.
You can't really play defensively. No, and if your opponent camps his Vaps hard enough, you die. Like that's kind of the lesson of being red on Vaps.
Yeah, it's not like you can. I mean, the speeder bikes can't interact with the Vaps, so.
Yeah, and you also have to make a play. You can't not make a play, otherwise you automatically lose.
Yep. All right, you guys got any more takeaways from that other than Tauntaun's still good?
Kyle, there is no meta. I don't know what to tell you.
I mean, I do think that we're going to see a little more variety and surprises at Worlds than we did there. But R2 was in all those Tauntaun lists also.
Oh, big shocker!
Shocker.
As long as we're talking about units that are too efficient, right?
Well,
yeah, geez.
It's hard to. I mean, I've used R2 a lot, and I can't decide whether it's because of the Tauntauns or because of R2. Like, he definitely makes everything that they do better. We've already talked about this, right? But they get in your face, they prevent you from getting to objectives, and then this tiny little droid with the inconspicuous just trundles into your deployment zone and scores a victory point.
His body is white and his head is silver, kind of like a salt shaker.
He has the tiny little 35-point salt shaker.
Like a thimble full of salt for you. Here it comes.
But I'm not convinced that he's a problem in other list archetypes. So
yeah. I mean, he kind of the games I've had with him, he kind of just does nothing.
Like I'm sorry, guys. I feel like you guys are like trying to pull my leg here or something, but like. I don't know. 35 points to give your saber tank 4 extra health. 35 points to just completely change the game on Vaps or key positions or whatever. Like, I don't know. I know you guys play Rebels and all, and it feels like he's not a problem, but like,
hey, I play Empire too, man.
Yeah. Okay.
For you, it's more academic.
I don't know.
He's really good.
He's really good.
Yeah, there's no denying he's amazing.
He can do hilarious things too. I was using him on the weekend, and he basically held down a whole flank by himself with 3PO, just like zapping fools with his electro thingy.
Yeah, I mean he's got 8 health, effectively.
10.
With
assuming
3PO.
You've got 3PO.
Yeah.
But I mean the 35-point version of him has 10 health or 8 health.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
It
is a lot easier to one-shot the 4 health version than the 6 health version.
Definitely.
Sure. That's fair. I just so I think the mortar is probably too cheap. I think R2 is a lot better than mortar.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see it.
All right, let's move on.
Mortar's also gated behind another unit.
Oh man, you got to take shore troopers to get a mortar. That's what a drag.
What a shame.
I just
crying shame.
There is some sort of cost there. Right? The cost is non-zero.
All right, we've been in our news/housekeeping segment for 35 minutes, so let's let's move on to Legion 101.
It's time for Legion 101. Classes in session.
So this is sort of a broad topic, obviously, but we're going to talk today about playing an aggressive list versus a gunline and vice versa, and what strategies you should be using. Because this meta is kind of shaking out, Rebel lists generally, and this was true even before Tauntauns when Rebels had Luke and Sabine. Rebels tended to have like good close-up units that are mobile, and Empire and for the moment the two new factions have more traditional like defensive focus lists. Gunline is a term that we use a lot, but essentially what that means is a unit that has like a lot of trooper units or other things that shoot, but are not necessarily super mobile and may not be as good in melee or up close. Would you guys agree with that definition, roughly?
Say it again.
Basically, a list that has a lot of... the fundamental definition of a gunline is a list that has a lot of things that shoot, but it may not be as mobile. Tends to be more defensive.
Oh, so more like a static
agreed.
defensive style. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
It generally has some... I think most gunlines also have a focus piece, like a specific focus piece that actually like kind of pivots the game. Like I can't think of like a really great gunline that doesn't have a Bosk or a Luke or something to that effect. Like you need a piece there that can still make a play while the rest of the gunline holds down the fort. And I think that's an important part or an important distinction in a effective gunline versus a gunline that isn't.
Right. Like, you could make a Veers list with 13-ish activations of just like shore troopers and stormtroopers and snipers and E-webs, and it would be very good at shooting things, but if you needed to like make a play on a central objective, it would not be super good at that.
No.
So, yeah, I agree. And that's been kind of the traditional, like, sort of quote-unquote default Legion style list, right? Somewhere between 4 and 6 core units, some other supporting units in there, a support commander like Veers, Krennic, or Leia, and then like a focus piece. That's kind of the standard.
3 snipers generally.
Well,
between 2 and 3.
Yeah.
Like just
that's kind of like the standard template for what we would call a gunline. And then you have your more aggressive lists, which, the triple Tauntaun list is like the token example of this. But this could also be, I think that speeder bike list falls into this category that we just talked about.
Yeah, I think the original like Veers Boba bikes list from the early days of Legion kind of falls into that category too, for the most part. They tend to be like heavy skews, I feel like.
Yeah,
generally.
Agree. It's less of like a all comers is not the right word, because these lists can be very good at a variety of different things, but less of a like flex type list and more, we talk a lot about the beatdown versus the control. If you're playing an aggressive style list, you're probably sort of by default the beatdown player. Your list is not going to be as good at being the control player.
Yeah, I feel like a list like this, like tabling your opponent comes first, the objectives kind of come second. Like you've got a bunch of units that can do objectives kind of just because you have to take them, but your primary pieces are not focusing on objectives, they're focusing on just running your opponent over.
Well, and in so doing, preventing them from reaching those objectives.
Yeah, totally. It's just that's kind of like a byproduct, right?
Yeah, I would actually argue, like, at least with the Tauntaun list, the whole function of the triple Tauntauns in that list, of course, is to kill things, but is also to put your opponent, like, to back them into their deployment zone so they cannot reach the table and interact with objectives.
Yeah, like kind of pin them back. You're basically leveraging their huge threat range. A last first, right? 34 inches of movement plus 12 inches of shooting. So it's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah, it's the table.
Yes, well, yes, the short edge, yeah.
Most
Most of the
the
table.
long edge too.
Well, 34 plus 12, right? So that's, 46. The Legion table is 72 inches from, you know, short edge to short edge,
All
right? So
right,
60
Yeah, I
tables.
just two
mean,
thirds of the table.
It's just 2/3,
like
the
I
functional 2/3 of the table, because, you're not using the whole table usually. You're probably just going to use, some
All right, so
80,
let's
80% of it, roughly.
all right, so let's talk about like strategically. Suppose you have a quote unquote gun line,
Sure.
and you are facing one of those aggressive lists. What strategies are you employing with things like deployment and setup, and how what's your approach to the game?
So one of the strategies that I've been employing specifically against Tauntauns is to intentionally set up in the farther back in my deployment zone. Now, you clearly need to play the game to completion for this to work, but if you're able to extend their engagement by like a turn, that can often mean the difference between kind of shooting the Tauntauns down to like there's only one Tauntaun in each unit before it gets to you, if you have an extra round of shooting on the way in. So I like to kind of do that, kind of stretch it so that if they want to kind of do the charge thing, they've really got to dash across the table. Um, uh, Otherwise, you kind of just have to sit there and eat it. I don't. I mean, like standbys are great, but you've also got to take them at the right time. Otherwise, they'll just get shot off by the snipers. It's kind of important that if you're going to take the standby strategy, that you put pressure on their snipers with your snipers, which kind of sucks because you're not shooting at their aggressive units. But if you're able to pull it off, it can be quite effective.
Yeah, so I actually want to talk about standbys, because like we've talked about this as a counter to aggressive lists in the past, but you can only shoot off so many standbys, right?
I mean,
So
they're really good against like rebel lists that are running Luke and Tauntauns. Like everything that matters in their list engages at range 2, basically. So, I mean, we played a game the other day where, I had like 4 standbys, and you're like,
yeah,
I don't
I
have
have
any way to
literally
shoot
nothing
these
that can
off.
shoot these off.
It's like, bring it. So I mean, that's definitely a viable strategy. It's not always going to work though. It didn't in that game.
You just got to make sure that when you set up your standbys, I mean, clones have an easier time of this for sure. But when you set up your standbys, you have to make sure you don't bleed units sort of outside of a shared radius. This is going to need like a diagram for me to describe this accurately, because it's going to be hard to do it over voice. But I've encountered this multiple times where the gunline player only takes one angle into account, which is the forward angle. They don't take this lateral angles into account, and so they bleed like cohesion a little bit. Where it's like, okay, well, you took this one standby here, but you left a unit outside of the bubble, so now I'm going to engage you outside of your standby because you have a vulnerable mini that lets me shoot the whole unit, which is underneath the standby umbrella. And so you have to just be very conscious of how you position yourself underneath the standby, and understand that Legion is a 2-dimensional game where you have to take into account the not just parallel lines but perpendicular lines, and try to make sure that you are self-contained and don't leave any unit outside where the Tauntaun player can find an angle to just kind of snipe you at. And I've kind of done this to multiple opponents where it's like, well, you see, there's this one unit, this one miniature here that's too far forward, and so I can grab hold of your gun line now with my taunts and just deliver the goods and kill those guys. If that happens and you get shot, make sure you kill that unit because that way you don't get vulnerable to another follow-up attack. It's also really important to figure out which minis you can remove and which minis you can't remove because of the way standby works. Vision from individual minis matters with your standby. So you just have to be able to be cognizant of that and position yourself correctly. There's probably a whole article one could write about this sort of thing. Ideas, um, suggestions. So
Man,
either
it's
of you
better
want to
to
take that
have like
on?
a blog or anything.
Huh? Yeah. So I'm gonna have a blog. Yeah. But anyway, my point is positioning really matters, and with standbys, it's also risky because once you've finished your move and taken your standby, you're locked in place. And because of the alternating activation, you know, uh, nature of the game, and the fact that if you move again, your standby goes away, or if something moves you, like Force Push, Vader's Might, You Disappoint Me, any of those other effects that cause movement, your standby is essentially lost. The only exception, of course, is being clones, where you have a safe unit standing with a in the backfield with a standby and one guy out looking at the unit that's maybe going to process that, which is probably an Overwatch clone. Um, uh, but yeah, I mean, just be cognizant of those things when you set up. That's definitely a big element of playing against an aggressive melee skill like Tauntauns. Is just looking at lines of sight, looking at where your miniatures are ultimately placed on the board, and try to make sure that everybody's covered.
Yeah, I think a big piece to that, and I think it kind of boils into what you were talking about to some extent, is that line of sight blocking terrain is generally not your friend when you're the one taking the standby tokens, which is kind of counterintuitive because like the whole kind of like epitome of standby is like you're this unit hiding behind the wall and somebody runs across and you just like blast him, right? Um, but it turns out just like the way Legion works, often your opponent can set up like a full shot on you where only like one or two of your models can see. So like this shooting back is like not effective at all
Yeah,
in those situations. And which I think is what you're kind of alluding to
that's
there.
one thing I'm alluding to. Yeah, which is
Yeah.
it's not just that. I mean, okay, so like worst case, you don't get to standby because one miniature was left outside the bubble, and so your opponent now has a place to stand where he doesn't trigger your standby unless you're overwatching. Um, the second worst case is what you're describing, where they find a place to stand where they're going to get hit by the standby, but they're only going to get like a one or two minis shooting
Yeah.
them, which is just horrible. Like maybe it produces one suppression, maybe, but it's at the end of the round. They've already activated. They're going to remove it. Maybe they're a crazy Tauntaun player that ran endurance instead of tenacity, which is a thing, especially if you're facing Commander Luke Trip Tauns. Commander Luke players are starting to run endurance in their Tauns because they don't have strict orders.
Yeah.
So
I can see that.
that's the
The
thing
other
that's
thing
happening.
is that I think a lot of people a lot of people forget like you can move off standby, and like in the situation we were just describing, where only one or two models can shoot, you should just move completely
Yeah,
into so they can't see you.
yeah, just
And
run.
conversely, you can kind of set up some traps specifically if your opponent is playing Tauntaun and your like foremost unit has the standby token. Like they can set up to ram you, and then like when they go to ram you, you're just like, yeah, I'm gonna move backwards. And then all of a sudden they're like, okay, my Tauntauns are now sitting out in the open with no help whatsoever.
You do a little rope a dope action.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that those are, you know, they're corner case scenarios for sure, but you should keep them in your toolkit for when you need to pull them out. And you're gonna have to do it a couple times and mess it up before you kind of get the feel for when you should do it or not. A lot of times it's probably more right just to stand there and shoot them with a full barrage before they ram you, than moving backwards because their guns are just as effective.
Yep. It depends a lot on your command cards and stuff too. Like, can you actually win priority next turn, and stuff like that? Because if not, then
Yeah,
they're just going to be able to open the turn with the thing that you avoided them doing at the tail end of the last one.
and like if your opponent like made a mistake and like went like relatively early with the tawns and you were able to somehow get a standby token down in preparation or whatever, and they like tried to like ram you in the first few activations, like that's a time where you want to move back so you can just open up with your gun line and just wipe them off the face of the planet. But yeah.
I like force pushing things into standbys too. That's super useful. If you have a character with force push.
That's probably the best use of force push now that you can't force push things off the table.
It's certainly the most flashy use of force push.
I mean, it's the most lethal,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
Um,
in theory, it's not necessarily more lethal than like if you have a unit that's activated already and you force push it around a corner and then you spend the rest of the turn shooting it. Like this is roughly the same thing.
yeah, for sure.
It's just flashier when you can do it all at once and you're like, and I'll trigger these 4 standbys and paste your unit.
I also like throwing people into mines with it, but that's something else.
Also fun. Anyway, all right. One thing too that I find useful playing a gunline versus an aggressive list is just being mindful of the line of sight blockers and trying to the extent that you can do so without spreading out too much, get like crossfire on those line of sight blockers and, essentially like denying the backside of them. It depends on what the table looks like. Of course, it depends on what your deployment looks like. But this is very doable in some situations. And, especially when you're talking about larger models like Tauntauns, they take up more space behind them. So you might not even need to get like a perfect, rear angle on that line of sight blocker. So I tend to, when I deploy a gun line against a list like that, I try and do like a little tight crescent thing. Hopefully without your flanks being too exposed, but essentially to try and like deny the backside of line of sight blockers as much as possible. So if the reverse is true, if you're playing an aggressive list against the gun line, what strategies are you employing?
So my general sense of how this matchup kind of plays out is that the aggressive list needs to make contact as soon as possible. Otherwise, I mean, the whole point of a gun line is to kind of weather you down. And if kind of the bite gets taken out of your aggressive list before you're able to do your damage, a lot of times the game's over before it's kind of begun for you. In that respect, like, if you shave a couple tauntauns off of them before they ever get to attack, like, chances are you're in a pretty good spot that game.
Yeah. As a Tauntaun player, I was really scared. Actually, one game where I had a shore trooper unit put 5 crits through heavy cover in my dodges, and I just lost a taunt outright. I was like, well, that hurt. And it was 1/4 of my tauntauns. And it was like, that actually really did impede me for a fair bit of the rest of the game. It definitely had to make me more cautious. Took a lot of my force away.
Yeah, I mean, they're very similar to speeder bikes in that, like, once they lose a model, they're less good. Now, I think they're better than a single speeder bike model.
Oh, by a long shot. Tenacity also makes that single sergeant like 40% more effective.
Yeah, but I mean, it's also, you're still shaving, a single tauntaun model as opposed to 2 tauntaun models is about 60% as effective.
Yeah, it makes their shooting horrible because now they only have 2 dice.
They pretty much have to rely on ramming things at that point.
Yeah,
if they want to do anything.
They're in melee or they're nowhere once they lose a single mini.
It should be noted that they're still pretty good at killing strike teams.
Yep.
Yeah, they are.
Or SAB strike teams.
Yeah. I do think that, you just want to get in there as soon as possible. And that's sort of counterintuitive to a lot of the ways that Legion has been played over the course of, the last 2 years, just because overall, generally the first person in actually engaging in like a highly aggressive play is often a significant mistake, unless it just is going to seal you the game.
I mean, there is some value to, depending on how terrain shakes out and stuff. Like if you can chip at your opponent safely with your mobility, and depending on where the objectives are and stuff, of course, as well. Like I think that's often better. In actually the game that you referenced earlier, David, it was kind of this matchup, right? You were playing aggressive list, I was playing gunline, and it was breakthrough. And you did essentially what Mike is describing. You got in there kind of as quickly as possible, and I think that worked out to your detriment ultimately. I mean, it's hard to say because we didn't play the game in the second way. Like that could have very well been worse. But
Yeah.
Sometimes like if you can safely wait to rush the objectives, I think that's also viable.
Yeah, I mean, I think Breakthrough is a very unique take for the aggressive list in that, on most of the other objectives, if you get in there quick with the aggressive units and do the damage, like you've kind of cornered them in their deployment zone and they can't get out and they can't actually like interact. But often, 3 tons crashed in there. Maybe they kill, 500 points worth of stuff, but generally they get cleaned up.
Yeah.
They're, I mean, like they will do their damage, but I feel like 60 to 70% of the time, the tawns do end up getting cleaned up. The damage is done at that point, and generally the game is over. But specifically on Breakthrough, like you need those tawns alive because that's how you're winning the game.
Right. So it behooves you to wait to do that rush until they can be scoring units at the end of the game. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I'm experimenting also with just holding back and just being like, okay, well, I could charge you, I could move 30 inches, but I'm not going to, and that sort of makes your opponent like have to make the play. You're trying to basically just force your opponent to make the bad move, essentially, at that point, which is kind of the essence of Legion. Is this is why we play this is why the defensive gunline style has prospered thus far, which is it's rewarding to stall, and it's rewarding to have range and high activation counts in the game. And if that ever changed, kind of one of the core doctrines of Legion play would be altered fundamentally. But I mean, like Tons can do the waiting game too because they don't have a compulsory move, so you can find some place to stash your Tons and then like play it out a little longer. You might be able to sneak the win through at the end there. It's not always the best idea to get in there as fast as possible.
No, it's worth noting that Tons are also far more flexible aggressive units. In that like peekabooing with them is really good. If you've got a LOS blocker, which I think can change that aggressive dynamic pretty substantially.
I was trying to avoid saying this, but I'll say it now. Shoot, what was I going to say? Oh,
You're trying so hard to avoid it that you forgot.
My brain actually literally blanked it out the instant I was about to say it. Wow, thanks.
I used Jedi mind trick.
Nice. All right.
Best ability ever, by the way.
I'll remember it in like 2 minutes when we've already moved on. Anyway, go on.
Yeah, I mean, most aggressive units besides Tauntauns essentially require you to like commit once you dive.
Right.
And they can sort of uniquely.
I remember what it was now.
There you go. See?
Okay, so you know how limited Viz is like, oh, I'm going to get my Tauntauns up where I can charge. Turns out it's actually better to just wait for 2 turns because then you compress the game into a 4-turn game rather than a 6-turn game because waiting favors the Tauntaun player. It's like, here's my resource, here's my pile of gold that I have to figure out how to budget over the course of the game. And if I have a condition that lets me sit on my pile of gold for 2 additional turns, bravo, bring it on, because now I have more gold to spend per turn.
I love that analogy. I love everything about it. Yeah, anyway. That's essentially what limited Viz does, ideally, for a Tauntaun list, is it turns it from a 6-turn game into a 4-turn game.
Yep. And it's already a 4-turn game because people are, not finishing games on time. So it's essentially a 2-turn game.
Bring on the chess clocks.
Yeah.
Bring them on.
We talked about that enough already. All right. And now here's a brief message from one of our blog writers, Zach Berry.
Hey, troopers. It's Zach here from the blog. Just came onto the Scoundrels here to talk about my blog post this week. which was about waffling heading into Worlds. I hope that I'm not alone in this situation as we try to figure out what lists we want to bring. As we know, I used to be a Rebel player, and now I play clones as well. For a long time, I was down and out on Rebels, but Operative Luke kind of brought me back in. So some list ideas I'm tinkering with pertain to clones and the Saber Tank. Reasons for that is I think the Saber Tank fits very well with clones right now as opposed to Kenobi. As much as I love bringing Jedi to tournaments, Kenobi is a defensive unit that fits the clones very well, but the activation count can kind of hurt him, whereas the tank can kind of pick up its points early on. As far as for Rebels, I still refuse to play those Tauntauns, so Operative Luke is intriguing to me because he plays defensive like Kenobi, ironically, but he has the activation count behind him where you can get to 10, 11, 12 activations with Operative Luke. His command cards are very strong, and it's just a list that I'm really entertaining, ironically, is a gunline. And one of the things I'm contemplating is whether a Rebel gunline can actually hold up in this meta, or maybe I just think that the gunline can hold itself up while Luke, runs it to victory. The most important thing for all of us heading into Worlds is getting reps. And the issue with waffling is I need to figure out what lists I want to practice with. And if I want to go with this list, well, how many games do I want to get with that? And if I want to go with this list, how many games can I get in with that? And we're into crunch time with 24 days left here. And it's really hard to figure it out. The best thing I could do for advice is pick a list that you know you're going to enjoy, but also think you'll be competitive with. And that's the importance to all of this, is that we want to go to Worlds and enjoy ourselves while being competitive. And obviously, one of the best things about these events is going to see all of our friends that we talk to online. And that's probably the most important thing to me to this event, is looking forward to meeting a lot of my 5th Trooper brothers that I haven't met yet, streaming the event, playing in the event, meeting a lot of people, and overall having a good time. So hopefully I can figure out this waffling business that I have going on. And if you're waffling on a list, I hope you can figure it out for yourself as well. Well, good luck practicing, and see you guys in a little bit.
Well, why don't we move briefly onto our exploratory section?
Let's go exploring with Notorious Scoundrels.
So the topic of this section is Chewbacca. So he has been making his way into competitive lists generally. We've already sort of in the past talked about how he fits into like a Tauntaun list. Because he has been used in, he was actually in one of those Eurochamp lists, I think. He was also used by Davis Kingsley, who finished second in Invader League in a Tauntaun list. I think he's got play also in other lists. I mean, essentially what he does is he acts as like a wound sponge for your more important things. Which...
Yeah. He does the guard's job a lot worse, but he does it.
Well, yes. If I, as a Rebel player, could take Imperial Royal Guard instead of Chewie, I would do it 20 times out of 20.
I mean, his shooting's a lot better.
It is, but like that's not why you're taking the thing with Guardian.
No, right? But he's a bit more flexible in that regard.
He is, right. His shooting is very respectable, especially against the red save list, because he's got range 3 Pierce with good dice, which is something. He doesn't have sharpshooter, which is unfortunate, but he does have surge crit. And if you get like an open shot against, a shore trooper unit or a mortar or something like that, like you've got a good shot at causing 2 to 3 wounds with that shot. So yeah, his shooting's pretty good. His melee is also not terrible. He's good at yelling at Tauntauns and fighting them off a little bit. 4 or 5 red if you take tenacity. He's kind of a flexy Guardian unit. He's not as good at the Guardian or the melee thing as Guard, but he's a little cheaper and he shoots better. And Rebels can't take Guard, so But yeah, I've been playing around with him a little bit in the Rebel Gunline style list, and he helps eat those meaty dice pools on your core units a little easier. He helps a lot with snipers too. A ton with snipers. He's a great sniper counter. Like that double hit on your core units through heavy cover converted to Pierce 1. He's just like, yeah, I'll just take 1 wound. That's good. I got 8 more of those.
Yeah, that's definitely, I think, the best situation to be using him in.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't think he does much against shores.
You win the sniper war hard, but yeah, I was about to say like the shores don't like the crits don't care, you know. That's
Not
his
only
biggest
that, but
downfall.
like, if you've got like 6 hits coming through, like sure, go ahead, Guardian 3. You're still losing half your unit.
Right, you're also taking a third of Chewie's health to do that, to even just get away with losing half your unit. Like,
Yeah.
do you actually Guardian? Do you just let them die? There's a chance you might.
I think there's a chance to just let him die.
Let him go.
If that happens. Yeah, he's not great against the short pools. That's for
He's
sure.
good against bikes. He's good against snows with flamer that haven't been seen in a long time.
He's decent against Tauntaun pistols.
Yeah, against Hans, yeah, definitely, because they have only 4 dice. So it's like, oh, I'm gonna take a couple of these, and then we're gonna let it ride on the Rebel, defense surge, and see if we get the 55%, toss.
Yep. But yeah, so snipers and Taun pistols, not so much short troopers. Decent.
Yeah. Plus, he's also a crit machine.
Yeah.
Like, he synergizes with the gun lines, and like I think we were talking yesterday, R2-3PO with Chewie, double aim Chewie, not the worst thing ever. Triple aim Chewie with Hunter seems also fairly decent if you're just rerolling for crits.
Yeah, I mean, also like in melee, he is no slouch.
Yeah.
Yeah, 4 to 5 red. I mean,
like
that's super reliable melee pool.
Yeah, especially if you're like fighting a like lightsaber user, like that's just as effective as like Vader's attack.
Yeah, because he doesn't have Pierce, but he doesn't care in that situation.
Yeah, it's just like, pretty good against all of that. Like he's gonna die eventually, but
yeah.
The worst part about him is that without upgrades, he's 95.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna take Tauntauns with tenacity instead.
Well, it depends on 2 things. It depends on what style of list you're playing, and you also can't take 4 Tauntauns. So,
True.
the reason like these 12 activation, 11, 12 activation Leia triple Tauntaun lists, right? You've already filled out your Tauntauns. You need something to keep them alive and to keep your snipers up.
Yeah,
like he's a perfect use for that.
Yeah, very specific function there. He just fits in really well too, because you only have like 85-ish points left. So it's like, oh, well, if I can make room for Chewie, I'll make room for Chewie.
There's this other guy. He's got a really cool shiny green lightsaber. He puts on a backpack really well, and he likes to use Jedi mind trick. I hear he's a really good alternative.
He's good. Yeah, he's real good.
Yeah,
can confirm.
Can confirm.
As long as we're talking about things that go in the operative slot.
Yeah.
Fair.
Yeah. I mean, I think your top 2 rebel operatives are R2 and that guy, right?
Yeah. Chewie's like Chewie's a close 4th after Sabine.
Look, I think he's in a more competitive spot than like Boba Fett right now.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Neither of them really have command cards, so.
What? Come on, Boba Fett's command cards are good.
Come on, that backpack rocket is still scary.
So is a whipcord.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean,
actually,
I feel like
might have huge
Backpack
value
Rocket
now.
has been significantly outclassed.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be amazing. Now it's like, oh, it's only 5 dice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of
And power corrupt a
kind
little.
of like, yeah, it's
But
kind of like,
wow.
all right, I mean, like, don't get me wrong, I'll play it if I was playing Boba, but I think in a lot of these lists, like if you're playing Boba, You probably also have some shores, so you probably just want coordinated fire and assault.
Yeah. Now that we've entered like the juiced ball era of the steroid era of Legion.
Steroid era. Yeah.
I mean, which basically makes Boba just whipcord, which, I don't know. But Boba's standard ranged attack leaves something to be desired.
Yeah, it used to be great when like killing, between 1 and 3 guys reliably was good, but that's
not good anymore.
True.
Yeah, we're
not on your focus piece.
Yeah,
right?
we're not bunting for hits anymore.
No more.
I mean, that's acceptable if you're Bosk and you're doing it from like the tip of range 4, but if you need to be at range 2 to do that, things get a little significantly more dicey.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was a fun tangent about Boba Fett. Yeah. So Chewie, pretty decent.
Yeah, I like him. I like him. I want to try some of these lists with him. My fear is that for now you have a 100-point alternative in Cassian in the future.
Well, we're at least
also a better operative.
Also, yeah. So now Chewie is the 5th.
He's not out yet. I will be playing him like crazy when he is. I mean, you guys know how much I hate snipers, right? It's,
mm-hmm. So the
if I can
arch
take
sniper
4
hunter.
snipers, I will do it. Yeah. Anyway,
What does it say about Chewie that we can't stop talking about everything that isn't Chewie?
Yup.
I think he's fine and interesting, and there's a place for him now when there didn't really used to be. I think there's more of a place for Chewie right now than Han.
Actually, yeah.
Can we talk about the fact that R2 and Chewie basically have very similar effective health?
No, because that's very sad. R2 can't guardian it.
Oh, jeez.
Not the point I was making.
No, that's the point he was
Really,
making.
R2 would be if he had like guardian too.
Yeah. Anyways,
Could you imagine if Chewie scored victory points instead of giving them away? When
He's
gets
actually
down?
pretty hard to bounty because you just guardian, you just kill him with guardian.
You just killed him with guardian. He says.
Wow.
Okay.
Anyway, all right.
Yeah, I get it.
So check out our interview with Luketti, which dropped yesterday. If you haven't done that yet, he talks about lots of things, including the RRG and vital assets and Iden and Cassian and all the hot news Clone Wars stuff. And then also check out the 5th Trooper this week for a super special interview with somebody.
Yeah.
Gonna be awesome.
Yes. All right. So we are the Notorious Scoundrels. I'm Kyle.
I'm Mike.
I'm David.
Stay fresh, cheese bags.
Ban Chewbacca.
Join us next week for another episode of the Notorious Scoundrels.
This has been a 5th Trooper production.